Hello, WordNerds, and happy Sunday, and welcome to our LGBT chat. I'm really excited about this chat. I think it'll be fun to talk about, especially since it is Pride Month. So, the first question I have for you guys today is, what is your favorite LGBT read that you have read, either recently or just in general? And Emma, I have you first.
I decided to pick a recent one. Otherwise, I'm just going to get overwhelmed. The one from this year, actually, that I thought was really amazing was The Music of What Happens by Bill Koenigsberg. It's a really fantastic contemporary gay male book. So, and it is own voices. And I'd never read a Bill Koenigsberg book before. Like the covers hadn't appealed to me, so I was like, meh. But then it turned out that he's a really great writer, so I'll probably read his other ones because I shouldn't have judged the books by the covers. But this one had a great cover, which is why I read it.
All right, Rachel, you're up next.
Okay, I also have decided to choose one that was fairly recent. I just last week finished I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver, and it was so good and so sweet, and it's about a non-binary main character. And it was like a fun, sweet romance, but also it was not like a fun, sweet book. Like it went into really intense topics. Like the first chapter is the main character getting kicked out of their house after coming out to their parents. So it deals with like deep topics, but like the main character is just so pure, like pure TM, like, and I just love the love interest. He's so sweet and adorable, and the whole book overall was like a really good debut. So would recommend. It's at the top of the list. Like the main character is just so pure.
All right, Kelly, you're up next.
It feels like a spoiler even by saying the title, but I'm going with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I won't get too much into it, but we talked about it for book club recently. I absolutely loved it. It is a fairly LGBT focused book and just so good from beginning to end.
Nice. So everyone went with newer book reads that they've read. I'm gonna go with something older that I read actually a couple years ago. And I'm gonna say Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe.
I did love that one.
I absolutely love the book. I read it again like not too long ago. And it's still just as good as I remember. So yeah. So my next question I have for you guys is, do you ever seek out a book specifically because there is an LGBT element to the book, or is it just kind of like a fun surprise sometimes?
I don't think I often like go looking for something saying like, oh, I want something LGBT, but sometimes it is like a part of the selling point of a book.
Agreed. Well, they're like, oh, here's a cool book about witches. I'm like, okay, rad. But they're like, but they're lesbian witches. I'm like, okay, rad. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. I suspect I used to like hunt them out more, and just the landscape of publishing has changed so much in the last few years that you really don't have to anymore. You'd almost have to work to find, especially in like contemporary and like a lot of way, at least some sort of secondary, tertiary character that isn't LGBT. So it's all over the place now, which is amazing.
Yeah, I'm just even looking at my shelf, like kind of looking at the stuff that I do have that I've classified as like LGBT, and I'm like, wow, the majority of these I've gotten in the last like 2 years. So it's just really exploded, which is great, and I'm really happy that we're coming into this whole new, genre and representation, and it's wonderful.
And then we're getting a lot more variety now too, which is something we talk in more depth about later. But like a lot where like before, when there were LGBT books, they were like the majority of them were male, and they were cisgender, and they were like a coming out book or a dealing with prejudice book. There's like a greater variety of genres and representations and identities and types of stories. So that's been really exciting to see.
Yeah. Like going off of that, like I've been really excited to see that there's been more LGBT white fantasy books.
Yes, agreed.
I think that's awesome. I don't know if any of you guys read Black Wings Beating by Alex Sandin?
Oh, I've read some of it.
I recommend it. I really liked
Oh,
it.
really? I'm just like, I
yeah.
couldn't get into it. It looks really cool though. Like I love the concept so much, but I just couldn't get into the writing.
Yeah, like I like so I saw him at CFS, like he was one of the authors on my channel, and the
dope.
way that he talked about falconry and like birds of prey and stuff, like that's like what really made me want to read it. And then of course like the LGBT element, of course, in the fantasy book. So that's like, you know, really cool. 10 out of 10 recommend. Do you guys have like a favorite like LGBT character that comes to mind in a book? Or I'm gonna open this up to like a TV show as well, because why not?
I'm always so bad about like picking one thing under pressure.
Yeah. Well, it's also like when I think about that, like when even you say like who's your favorite LGBT character, I'm just like I like characters because they're good characters. I'm not necessarily like,
Right.
oh, this character's great because they're gay. So it's like like a different way of thinking about it. So I'm like, okay, like what characters do I know who are
Happens to be
LGBT?
yeah.
So I'm like, okay, and like who do I like out of them, out of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah. Well, like my favorite LGBT books are books that the characters just happen to not be straight. Like it doesn't really have to do with them coming out. Like I like those books as well, but I'm just kind of like, oh, cool. Like it's this really awesome story, and the love interest happens to be a girl. Oh, okay, not the end of the world, like that kind of thing. So like J. Kristoff's Nevernight, like Mia ends up being bi, and that's just a part of her, and that's just kind of normal. And she's like, yeah, whatever. Like that girl's hot. Or even from like Six of Crows, where Wylan and Jasper are like super cute, and they just happen to be super cute together, and I'm like, I like you guys a lot because they're good characters. I think that's like my root of what I'm trying to say.
Speaking of which, I'm very excited about more of an exploration of Nina's bisexuality in the new series. Without spoiling anything, some of the potential there I'm excited about.
I'm excited for the potential. It's great.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So like I kind of like I said earlier, like this is kind of a hard chat to like find questions on. But so you said you guys don't pick books out like just because like they're LGBT characters, which like I don't either. I think of it as a fun surprise, because it just makes it like more interesting to me. And it's like, oh, this is not like the status quo. Do you think there's a specific reason why like publishers are like greenlighting LGBT books more now?
Part of it has to be demand, because now you have more and more people, especially in the last like, I don't know, 20 years maybe. I feel like LGBTQIA plus has just become more of a thing. More people are coming out. It's being more acceptable. So there is a big demand for it. So publishers are suddenly like, wow, we can make money off of this. And I mean, it is about money, but it's also about people being like, this is my own story. And, there's just giving people more characters to relate to. And because it's like, as just like, I don't know, a straight white man, like you have plenty of characters to relate to. So it's, if I was a publisher, I'd be like, yeah, okay, like what makes your character special if it's the same thing as all these other books? But they're like, hey, I have this really cool story about a non-binary character who saves the world. I'm like, dope, that sounds great, let's publish that.
There's a lot to be said too for like some of the titles, even just like 4 or 5 years ago, that were really popular, like Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda, I think really proved to the publishing industry that there is a demand and that people will read books about LGBT characters. And so I think, because like with any like movement or trend in publishing, like once a few books get really popular, then publishers start looking for more of that. So
except this is like almost not a trend. It's just like a new,
definitely,
like
yes,
a new
in
genre,
general, like movements,
things
like that,
whatever.
I definitely think it did start out as a trend though. Like I think a lot of genres kind of start out as a trend, but like we were saying earlier, like a lot of the early like LGBT book reads like had a very like similar premise. Like it was pretty cut and dry, and like we said, now like they're branching out, which is really interesting. So if you knew someone in your life that like wasn't like super into like reading about LGBT characters or was even like anti-LGBT, is there a book in particular that you would recommend to them to be just like, hey, you should read this book?
That's a good question. Because I think I would like choose something where it's kind of sneaky. You know, like something that's like a genre the person likes that like, you know, because I think a lot of times someone like that, like if you just like handed them something, like I'm trying to think of an example, something like Simon Versus, like where like it's very clear that it's about a gay character, that someone who maybe is more hesitant or against that just isn't going to read it, like no matter if you give it to them or recommend them. But if it can be something where it's just like a small part of the story, you might be a little bit more successful, and then like ease them into it with more and more.
Yeah,
but I don't know what.
Yeah, well, like Emma, you said, you just like recommend based on genre. Like I think we're lucky enough now to have LGBT characters in a variety of genres, so you can be like, here's this cool sci-fi book that also happens to have a lesbian main character, and like kind of like push it that way. Well, like I'm gonna go back to Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Like the first book, Mia hooks up with a guy, and you're like, okay, she's just straight. And then in the second book, she ends up starting to have feelings for a girl, and it's just like, oh, okay, like wasn't really expecting that, but I'm not mad at it, and like, oh, all right, that's just like part of her in the story. So like it takes you along that way. So like, yeah, definitely recommend this book. It's a great book.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think I've heard some people say before that LGBT books really got their start in fan fiction. So like, because fan fiction was that outlet to be able to express like what like we wanted. What do you guys think about that? Do you agree or do you disagree?
Definitely. Because I think a lot of the people who are now becoming published writers are people who grew up writing fan fiction online, because a lot of us like were preteens and teens during like the big internet boom, when sites like fanfiction and fanfiction.net and stuff like that started. It's like, I know I started out writing fan fiction, and I feel like a lot of people who are getting published now are around my age. So definitely, I think a lot of the writers got their start there. And so it's kind of come from that.
Yeah, like Wattpad or what have you.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like, I want to say like subgenre almost, that up until just recently, and even maybe still a little bit recently, like some people felt kind of guilty or like uncertain about writing. And so it was those platforms that they went to when they wanted to read something like that, because it wasn't in mainstream media. But then suddenly it did hit mainstream media, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is a mainstream thing. And now everyone's really excited about it. So it's easier to get. But I definitely think it all started on probably, like fanfic.net or something.
The graphic novel world has always been a little bit ahead too. With regards to representation in general. Like there tends to be more representation for underrepresented groups in graphic novels, I think. So yeah, I think they're always a little bit ahead on things like that. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so into some of the more like I don't want to say like drama, but like, so what is your opinion on like so like J.K. Rowling, for example? So there was like the big outrage because she has this really great opportunity to showcase a gay relationship for two powerful wizards, and something that she said happens in the books, but like we're not getting to see any of that. So what do you think about like that?
I'll say with the J.K. Rowling example in particular, my issue is not that like, it's not that Dumbledore has never like been like, hey, I'm gay, or that we've never like seen him like kiss Grindelwald or something, because I think there is never really having like read all the books and seen the movies, I don't think there's ever been like a really good opportunity for that to happen yet. Because I think a lot of people went into Fantastic Beasts thinking that it was going to be like when Dumbledore and Grindelwald were younger, because that's when that all happened. And it's later, it's like after their like sort of romance. But anyway, so my issue is not so much that Dumbledore's never like come out within the series. My issue is that there are no other gay characters. Because I understand why especially within the Harry Potter books, why it never came up. Because like it would have been weird if Dumbledore had been like, hey Harry, I'm straight. Like if it would have been weird for Dumbledore to ever mention like a romantic relationship.
His romantic history,
yeah, it's been really weird. Like Harry's mentor and very old. You know? Like, really, my issue is that Harry's in this school full of like teenagers and preteens, and like no one's exploring their sexuality. No one is gay. No one is trans. Nothing. So that's really my issue. Is not Dumbledore. It's the lack of anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost like, yes, that is an issue that she didn't make anybody diverse, but at the same time now she's kind of backtracking in a way that I don't really respect, because if she had said, you know, hey everybody, when I wrote those, you know, it was in the 90s and I wasn't thinking about that kind of thing, so I made all these characters white and straight, and in the future I will try and do better. Like, she could have just said that and I would be like, okay, fine, like I get that. But she had to go back and be like, well, actually, this person has been gay all along. You just didn't know it because I'm super ahead of my time. And she just like tried to backtrack too fast. And I think that's where I was like, I don't know. Like, you could have done it one way or the other. And it's like,
and that she still hasn't really made any effort.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, exactly.
like regardless of Dumbledore, she hasn't made any effort to include like different identities in any character, you know, so like, and I like contrast that to like, I guess like Cassandra Clare, who like there was some like backlash against some of the like gay representation in her original series, and the way she presented that, but like I think she's done a lot of work since then to like correct some of her mistakes and to like have even more representation in her books. And she's never been like, well, actually this, when she got called out, she's just like done the work in her future books. So,
yeah, there's a ton of representation in her books.
All right, so I found a really good tweet kind of on this topic, but for context first, through another question, I was trying to find a different tweet from Shannon McGuire just had a new book come out, Middle Game, I think, and somebody asked her if one of the characters was Ace, and she had this, the thing I can't find was her like, oh, well, this, I don't think Dodger's ever really thought about it, but if I were to pick, she's like pansexual, aromantic, like she had this whole like, she's a queer author, she's definitely thought about it. But as a reaction to that, she had a tweet about just talking about representation for a second and kind of exactly what we're talking about. Something can be good representation without being stated by the creator. Queer coding can be both positive and negative, of like you don't always need to spell it out. Interpretation counts, like if it was good representation for a reader. There's follow-up tweets that I'm just kind of interpreting into the first one. So if a reader sees a character they love and can see some of their sexuality in that, great, but the creator should not get credit for anything outside of the text. So it's great if you kind of put it in there and it's interpretable, but you don't get like representation points for just kind of like vaguely referencing maybe.
Well, also, if you're just a normal person, you might be like, oh, yeah, you know, in this regular conversation, oh, actually, you know, I like girls, or actually I don't like anybody. But it's not like you're going to be going up to everybody being like, hi, I'm Rachel, I'm queer, so anyways, like you wouldn't really be doing that. So it says you might not have to put that in a book, and if it's not appropriate.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So what do you think is your LGBT read that is like the one that got away? Meaning, like, what's an LGBT book read that you've wanted to read but just haven't had the opportunity to, or just haven't read?
Red, White, and Royal Blue. Red, White, and Royal Blue. I bought it because actually WordNerds were like freaking out about that, like on our Facebook chat. It was like, so I bought it, but I haven't read it yet.
Well, it's book club later this year, so you will have a chance to read it.
Yes. I'm gonna read it next. Actually, that's my plan.
I'm going through books and seeing what I can remember, because I'm sure there's something.
Because there's so many now, it's kind of like there's just countless that I want to read.
I really want to read the Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy.
It's so good.
I haven't read it yet, but I really want to.
It's one of my favorite books, honestly. Felicity is so cool, and I love that book. It's great. It's super great. Would recommend. Yeah. I liked it better actually than the Gentleman's Guide. Like Gentleman's Guide was like a fun romp, and Lady's Guide is like, it goes into more issues of like sexism and sexuality, especially like in history. But also Felicity is just like super badass and awesome, and it was just like a really fun story. And then like sea monsters, and it was A bit unexpected, but it was great.
One book that I really want to read, it's not so much one that got away because I think it just came out this year, but I really want to read it for like the representation and the concept is E.K. Johnston's The Afterward, which sounds really good. And it
One of
has
my
queer
friends read
women,
it.
I think. Yeah.
One of my friends read it and said it
Really
was really great.
Yeah. Because it's like the aftermath of like a quest. Like it's like what do this group of knights do like after they successfully finish their quest?
Oh,
And it's like all
interesting.
female knights too. So
Oh, that's cool.
Mhm.
That sounds really interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm trying to think of another question. We've come to the portion of the show where I'm officially winging it.
That's okay. These are like really good questions, so you're doing good.
Are there any LGBT nonfiction books that you've read?
The 57 Bus is really good. It's about a true story that happened in Oakland, California, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, I think, where a non-binary teen was on the bus, and they were like assigned male at birth. They were wearing a skirt, and a black teen set fire to the skirt as like part of a prank, but the material was really flammable, and the non-binary teen ended up like in the hospital with like really bad burns. And so it's a really good look at like both sides of the story and like the like kind of like homophobia and transphobia that went into like what the black teen did, but also like the really unfair justice system and how it treated the black teen. So it's like a really cool look at like two different identities and like the systems and the attitudes that like hurt them. It's really good.
That sounds really interesting. I'm definitely gonna have to check that out.
So the 57 Bus?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to read more nonfiction this year, so I'm just gonna add that to Goodreads real quick.
I like it.
I read a book called This Book is Gay. It's great. It's basically like kind of like a guide to being gay, like as a teenager, which is really interesting. The book is like rainbow, which is cool, and it has like a whole bunch of different things from like coming out and like figuring everything out, which is it's really nice. It's basically like a little guide. So
I've now fallen down the rabbit.
I can picture the cover.
Yeah, it's cute.
I was just gonna say I've fallen down the rabbit hole if I clicked LGBTQ on Netflix because I was going through like I want to watch Tales of the City, which they've started advertising to me now because I guess that just came out and looks super cute. But there's so much on Netflix that is really, really great.
Yes, I can also say that there are a lot of LGBT representation in shows on Netflix. I just finished, so interestingly enough, I just finished the show Tuca and Birdie like this weekend. And Tuca's bisexual, and that's pretty interesting. And it's like such a small mention, which I kind of like that too, when they don't make like a big deal out of it, because like it's not a big deal. They just mentioned that she had a girlfriend at one point, and that was kind of cool.
On tvtropes.com, they call that "by the way" of like it's just a casual.
That's clever.
Fleabag kind of does that too. Like she like most of her relationships are with men, but she also like she like kisses a woman at one point. Like it's just kind of like a thing that's in there. It's very much a by the way, and a really good show.
So speaking more of shows, because I can come up with lots of questions about shows. Is there any like coming out or like I don't want to say coming out moment? Is there any like LGBT moment in the show that you can just like remember that is like just really stands out in your mind? For example, the example that stands out in my mind is the kiss from Glee with Kurt and Blaine, because I remember when the episode came on, because me and my best friend are obsessed with Glee, and she lived 2 doors down from me, and we would talk to each other during the commercial breaks of Glee. And I remember when that happened because I swear we could hear each other screaming. We were screaming so loud. It was great. But that was like the first time we'd ever seen like 2 guys kiss or any like same-sex like coupling like on TV. It was like our minds like were blown.
Well, I kind of wanted to mention something, and that actually fits in pretty well with that. In that I was reading a really interesting article about how LGBT representation is very overly sexualized in a lot of media. which is maybe why also it hasn't gotten to YA as quickly as it did other genres like romance, which has kind of had that for a really long time. And how when you ask people, or if people ask you like, oh, what are you reading? And you're like, oh, I'm reading this, cute story about, two gay men doing this thing. They're like, oh, okay. Like they automatically have this assumption that it's like an erotica or something, like, oh, and every kind of female book is just them having sex all the time, and like it's super sexualized, when it's like, no, they're just two characters that happen to like the opposite sex, and they're like going on an adventure, and there's maybe like a kiss, but everyone's like, no, like that has to be
not appropriate for children.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, like when that was on TV, I actually remember watching that Glee episode 2 and being like, oh my god, like wow, just because I never seen that before, because it wasn't appropriate for TV. And I'm like, what? There's kissing and like sex scenes and all this other stuff with regular straight couples, but you can't have that as LGBT because that is not appropriate, which I think is ridiculous, because that's just saying that a whole portion of people are not appropriate for just existing. And like if you're a kid who maybe starts identifying as something other than straight, you're going to look at that and be like, oh, well, I'm not, appropriate. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have like, two men kissing and everything, but I'm kind of like, but to not have it at all, or to say that it's wrong, especially when you're like a kid, like that must just be awful. And even just like looking at it, I'm like, that doesn't really seem fair. Like
and now we're getting two men getting married on Arthur.
Right. Well, that banned like everywhere, and I'm like, but why? Like, it's a cartoon. Like, calm down there, Alabama.
Everywhere, or just like Alabama?
Yeah, I think it was just
banned in Alabama.
Yeah, I thought it got banned like most of the Bible Belt.
No,
okay,
so.
Probably.
It's just like one state.
Like banned other places in the Bible Belt, but yeah, I thought that was so awesome. I watched the episode, like I found it online so I could watch it because I love Arthur.
I loved Arthur. I didn't know it was still a thing, but
I thought that went off the air like a while ago
when I was finished watching it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was like going through this list of like TV coming out moments from BuzzFeed. I sent it to you guys, and like going through it, I was like, oh man, there's so many good ones. Because one I was already thinking of before I even looked at this list was Elena in One Day at a Time. That whole like couple of episodes,
I loved it,
where she's like coming out to her family, is so well done.
It's so nicely done.
And then also on this list was Schitt's Creek, when like David explains being pansexual, and like it's all through like wine metaphors. I don't know if anyone else has watched that show
right now. I love it.
He's at the store with this like with his friend who he like just slept with the night before, and they're looking at wine, and she's like, so I like red wine, and he's like, okay, and she was like, I was under the impression that you like red wine too, but it seems like you might also like white wine. And he's like, oh, I like all wines. And it's like such a good metaphor and a really fun. It's like funny, but also like really good. So,
so going back to what Rachel said about like how a lot of times like it like LGBT like it's over sexualized. I was looking at the thing that Emma sent, and the Petra and JR from Jane's Virgin. I know, me too. But like that like was like that was like the first time like it was ever like brought up that they might be a couple, is like Petra had like a sex dream, like so like that's like another like thing, like going back to what Rachel said.
I love Petra so much. And like my heart is so full just reading through this list. Like Buffy was one of my probably my first like LGBTQ couple in a show that I loved. Not counting like Xena was probably my actual first, but it was always subtext there.
I saw another one that was on the list was Andy Mack. I know Megan has seen Andy Mack. Has anyone else?
I'm too old for this.
Andy Mack is great for all ages. But that was like the first Disney Channel show to ever have like a gay character, which I thought was pretty cool because you barely see it for like YA, but you really never see it for like 10, 11, 12-year-olds, like that age range.
Yeah.
So that was
oh my gosh, that reminds me. So before I quit the bookstore, there was a couple books that came in, and it was one of them was called The Princess and the Knight, and it's a 3 to 5 like picture book. Oh my gosh, it's the cutest freaking thing.
There's another one that's The Princess and the Maiden, I think. It's the same author. So there's like two picture books, and one's girls and one's boys. Yeah.
And it's like one of them is like this princess to her parents, like, oh, we're gonna bring you to this ball so you can meet the prince and whatever. And so she goes, but she like really doesn't want to. And then she gets there and she befriends a female knight, and like they fall in love. And then the parents see her and they're like, oh, we just want you to be happy. So they like arrange a wedding and they just like go do cool stuff together. And I'm like, this is so amazing, especially for like a 5-year-old. I don't know, that like just makes my heart so happy that like that's becoming a thing now. And like middle grade has kind of like upped its game a little bit more now as well.
There's a picture book that just came out. I think it's called When Aiden Became a Brother, I think. And it's about like a transgender child whose like mom is about to have another baby. And the author is transgender, and it looks really good. I'm excited for us to get it at the library.
Oh, it's amazing.
That's so cute. Okay, so I have another question. So what do you think about books that are like LGBT that are not written by like own voices? Like, do you guys have like an opinion on that?
I'll read them, but they usually aren't my first recommendations to other people. Like, I'm very mindful about it when I'm like recommending LGBT books, that I like try to prioritize own voices ones. And I try to prioritize them in reading too, but they're the ones I also prioritize in like recommending to people because they're going to be more authentic. And it's definitely, I know Rachel mentioned like romance and how like LGBT books were more common in romance than YA for a while, but like that's a big issue I have with queer stories in romance, is that most of them are male written by women, and like that's been an issue in like LGBT romance, adult romance for a long time. But it's harder for like gay men to write and publish those stories.
What's the word I'm thinking of? It's like when you put something on a pedestal, like you have people that are not LGBTQIA+ writing stories about people. Like, what's the word when you like? Oh man, I said like when you were like in romance and stuff, like fetishizing. There we go. Like they're like kind of fetishizing that as a thing, and I'm kind of like, oh, that's like probably not accurate.
Right.
Because that was like the only place that you could find it for a long time, that might have skewed a lot of people's perceptions on it.
And I know, like, going back to like fan fiction, like a lot of the like male / fiction was written by girls, but it was a lot of times girls who were like trying to figure out their own sexualities too, and a lot of times ended up not being straight. So like there's a lot of nuance to it, but yeah, I definitely try to like be mindful of like who the author is, and sometimes authors aren't out yet, so that also makes it like difficult because you don't know for sure someone's identity. But I do try to be mindful, especially like as a woman, if I read a book with like a male romance, I try to be like really mindful and like cautious of not fetishizing it myself as I read it.
In the comments, Erin says, I definitely prefer own voices, but don't mind as long as the person does the research and approaches it respectfully, and not because like male is popular or something, so kind of doing it for the right reasons. Or
Well, now that kind of like goes into the future writing of like, now that it's kind of like open game and you can kind of write whatever you want, which is great. And not a lot of people will buy a book because it's LGBT or just because you happen to have a character, like whatever, no big deal. So like if a straight author wants to write a story that happens to have an LGBT character in it, if they like do the research or whatever, I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, that's cool. Like if you want to write about that, like write about it.
Yeah, that's prime as well. Like don't tell a coming out story. But having gay characters.
Like my brother, is this, or my friend is gay, and so I know everything, and like whatever. Like as long as you're not being preachy about it, then I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like write the thing.
Yeah.
Make them gay, I don't care. If it's a good story and a good character, like I don't really care what they're like.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm definitely particularly cautious, if it's like a coming out story or like the book is about being like gay or trans or something, if it's written by someone who doesn't have that identity. Right. I'm more cautious about it.
Definitely.
Speaking of fantastic transness, Vanessa in the comments mentioned Know Me from Sense8, and I was such a huge Sense8 fan when that was on. I loved that. It was the gayest, happiest, wonderfulest show, and I miss it very much.
It's on my watch list. Like everyone tells me it's a show that I would really, really like. So I need to definitely watch that.
It was
tried to
my
watch
favorite
it.
show when it
The
started.
plot was just so weird. I couldn't follow it.
The first couple episodes are difficult, and then after that, it kind of there's a lot going on.
Okay.
Okay, so do you think there is any part of the LGBT spectrum that is like still underrepresented in like fiction?
Definitely trans characters.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Ace Arrow.
Yeah,
trans
that's what I was thinking too.
Mhm. Well, the only thing is that I've read some characters who are Ace or Arrow. Actually, Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy has a asexual main character. But that's the only book that I've read that it was done well. Like I've read a couple other ones that they just, I don't know, like maybe they're just not, like the writing's not good, but like I don't feel like it's a good representation of somebody. And as far as I know, the authors themselves are not Ace or Arrow. So that might
Ace,
have something
Arrow,
to do it.
and trans, part of the issue is that the few things that are out there, a lot of them aren't own voices. Like
Yeah.
looking at like own voices trans stories, like still one of the like top like first ones to recommend because there are so few is If I Was Your Girl, which is like fine, but it's a very basic story. It like won the Stonewall Award and stuff. And it was a landmark book because it was the first like trans YA book by a trans author. But it's like such a very basic like trans coming out kind of story, and like I want more variety, you know, and there's still so little.
Well, I actually, now that I think about it, like I don't know any book that's about a trans main character. I think there is it Some Assembly Required. Is that I think a
Might
trans main
be.
character? But I don't. I think there's a couple books on my shelf that I can look at and be like, I think there's a couple of characters here, but I've never read a book with a trans main character.
Yeah, I haven't either. I've read someone's like non-binary, but
Mhm.
like I can't.
Yeah, there's a few non-binary ones.
Yeah.
If I Was Your Girl is seriously like the only own voices one I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, that's also like I wonder if that's just because like people aren't buying it, or if publishers don't think that it will sell. But like especially now with like Drag Race being huge, there's a couple of big trans YouTubers that are huge. You think that it would be more of a thing, you know, and people there would be more options. So I'm kind of like wondering, like, is that going to be the next push of LGBT literature?
Mhm.
I'm guessing maybe there isn't a lot. I don't even know if this is a guess, but like there's less trans authors because there's less trans people, and maybe publishers are waiting for more own voices stories rather than like, yes, there's a market for it, but let's wait for the right stories and let these people tell their own stories.
I know a few of the other like trans stories that have come out. I know there have been some, I don't know any of the titles off the top of my head because I haven't read any of them, but there have been a few with like a cis main character with a trans love interest. And I know a lot of them have been like criticized heavily for like very poor representation. So yeah, it's like maybe we just need more to encourage more trans people and like help support them and getting their books published.
Well, the only trans author that I know of is Charlie Jane Anders, and she does like regular fantasy sci-fi. I think like All the Birds in the Sky, and then she came out with a new one that's like the city at night or something like that. And they were good, but they're not YA. So like that, and that's literally the only trans author that I can think of. So I would love to see more.
Another area that I think is like criminally underrepresented, and it's a genre, not like a specific identity, but like I'm always really surprised and kind of like sad about how little representation there is in science fiction still. So I'm like, it's the future. Like if trends continue the way they are, like there's gonna be more people who are like out and like living their lives, you know, like, and the fact that like so many people are like straight and cis in science fiction in the future and white in the future, it's like, wait, what?
Okay, so to that, I have to say, I just finished reading a book that is the gayest thing I've ever read. It was so good. And it was Once and Future by Amy Rose Carpetta and Corey McCarthy. Oh my gosh, it was so fun. It's a futuristic King Arthur retelling in space, except King Arthur's a girl and everyone's gay.
I love it. I love it
The
already.
authors are like their wives, I think, aren't they? It's like
Guinevere is a lesbian. The King Arthur, Ares, she's bi. one of the other characters is gender fluid, and Merlin's gay. And it's just the whole thing. Actually, it's because it's like a little bit of like a person at a time, sort of, because Merlin like wakes up every time Arthur is reincarnated, and this time he's been reincarnated into the body of a girl, and she's actually a refugee from this other planet, and he hasn't like been woken up in many years. So when he goes and he ends up finding each other and they're talking, and he keeps making mistakes about like gender pronouns, and keeps being like, well, I don't like what's that person, like what's that guy over there doing? And they're like, how dare you assume his gender? Like, you don't know what they are. Like, you could go ask them, or like they're really shocked that he doesn't get the nuances of being gender fluid and all this stuff. It was really, really good. It was a really fun book, and I just loved all of the points about it.
I looked at the authors to confirm it because I was pretty sure. Corey McCarthy uses they them pronouns. I'm not sure of their like what identity they identify as. Yeah, Corey McCarthy uses they them, and then they and Amy Rose Capetta are partners. So
because Corey McCarthy wrote that other book I was just telling you about, the now major motion picture.
Nice. Oh, really? Okay. Oh, I saw you get that 5 stars on Goodreads. How was it?
It was really, really good. I guess, maybe you were bound to get with technical difficulties. It was like a contemporary romance written for feminist fantasy fans. I loved it a lot.
Really? Okay, because I was like, I don't know, it looks just like a contemporary, and I'm like not really into that, but apparently it's great, so might have to go pick that up now.
What was the book that you said, Rachel? I'm gonna have to put it on my Goodreads so I don't forget.
Once and Future.
Okay.
Yeah, it's and the cover is freaking beautiful. And it's a retelling of The Once and Future King by T.H.
I want to
White.
read this right now.
It was really fun. It wasn't, okay, I'm gonna say, like, the writing was good. It wasn't the best. There had a lot of pacing issues. But the book overall was just like a really interesting idea, and there was a lot of good like politics and stuff about gender and identity, and it's set in space, so it's like a fun space romp, but like also has like fantasy elements of it, and yeah, it was really good.
Nice.
It was pretty much exactly what Emma was looking for.
Yeah, go check that out. Well, actually, Amy Rose Capetta, like, while we're on the subject of her, every book that she writes has some kind of LGBT main character, because The Brilliant Death has somebody who's gender fluid.
Makes sense, because like for her, she is queer in some way. I'm not sure of her specific identity.
Oh, and there's the Lost Coast, I think, and everyone in that, there's a lot of queer girls, and I believe there's I think people who are gender fluid and lesbian.
I haven't gotten far enough into it, but I think I read somewhere Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff saying that like there's a lot of LGBT characters in Aurora Rising.
Oh, I'm trying to remember. Like, I just read that. Are they?
I feel like I can think of at least one character who I think is either bi or pan.
Yeah, one character in there is, but I don't know about anybody else. I think it's just one. Maybe not yet. I don't know. I don't know who we're gonna meet yet, but from the first book, I don't
know. Aaron asked in the comments if you had any most hated tropes, i.e. barrier gaze.
Yeah, that one's terrible.
I got a head start on this one and found a list of 17 LGBT tropes Hollywood needs to retire.
Oh, okay.
The bottom one is everyone is straight. So that's probably yeah.
Yes, agreed.
This list has murderous bisexual, but I am so here for murderous bisexual.
Yes, down. That's literally the entire plot of Nevernight.
I hate the bisexual is always promiscuous trope. That gets on my nerves.
And like indecisive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this list has closeted jock, gay best friend. All lesbians want kids. I didn't know that was a trope, but okay.
Yeah, me neither. Huh.
Depraved homosexual. Yes, that one's bad.
Yeah. I feel like the only thing that I don't like is like just having one random gay kid, like just one random gay kid there, just for fun,
Yeah.
So you're like, actually, it's diverse. So I say that all the time with like the one random Asian. I know that sounds terrible, but like whenever you read a book, it's like everyone's white except for one Asian person, and it's just, I don't know, they're just so interchangeable. So you have the one random queer person and the one random Asian person, and then you're like, it's diverse. So like, no.
One random queer person who is like perfectly like happy and satisfied to just only know straight people. Like they don't go seek out like queer communities or anything, which is like not realistic. They're like,
Not at
no,
all.
I'm fine not knowing anybody else like me. Whatever.
Yeah. Oh, and that the queer character is always in love with the main character, who is straight.
Their best friend.
Always.
Oh,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
100% all the time. And I'm like, I know plenty of people that also like boys and girls and are not attracted to me that I am friends with. So like,
it's a really damaging trope too. Like when you've been like inundated with that, and then you have like a friend who comes out to you, and then there's like this like, oh my gosh, are they attracted to me? Like, are they going to try and come on to me? Like that's like a thing that like straight people think when their friend comes out to them because it's such a common trope. Like I remember like one of my friends in high school came out to me and she was like, don't worry, I'm not into you. And I was like, first off, I'm offended. Why not?
Yeah.
All right. Like, I wasn't worried about that. You're fine. Like,
yeah.
I also hate the trope that like every gay character has an unsupportive family. Like not every gay character, like their parents are always gonna kick them out. Like there are some very supportive parents out there, you know.
Especially books about like gay characters in like non-white families. There's a lot of like nobody supports them. Those actually, I had some issues with the Love and Lies of Ruxana Ali, I think is the full title. I had some issues with it. It's kind of that whole like, I have a gay daughter, so I'm gonna write a book about it kind of thing.
Yeah, which she does.
Yes. But something I did really like about it was like the like diversity of like family reactions, because like it is about like I think she's Pakistani, if I remember right, somewhere in the Middle East, and so like I think definitely a trope with like Middle Eastern characters especially is like no one in their family supports them and everyone like hates them. And she did a really good job of showing that like, yes, she had family members who like thought she was like possessed by a demon and stuff, but she also had family members who like helped her and supported her and loved her. So was really
well, that's like just a common misconception that like, oh, all non-white, non-American families will banish, will banish their, LGBT child, but like we're a shining star, an example, and I'm kind of like, that's definitely not true. I have plenty of friends who are not white who are on the LGBT spectrum, and their family is totally fine with it. And I also have friends who are white and gay and bi and trans whose parents like are not comfortable with it. So you can't just preach that like, oh, because we're in America or because, my family's white, then everything here is happy and fine. And, I can't believe that other culture would, dare assume things about their daughter. Like, it's ridiculous.
I actually think supportive parents are one of my favorite tropes in LGBT. One Day at a Time or Love, Simon, like all of those, just like try to figure out how to do it well. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Got a couple of recommendations from Erin in the comments. I think she was with us. Zach Brewer is also on Voices. He's got great advice on Twitter. And then The Lost Coast by Amy Rose has gay witches and then several exclamation points. Because
I want to read it so much. I want to read it.
Trying to think of another question.
Yeah.
We have like 6 minutes to fill up.
No pressure.
Throw book titles out there because like let's just start recommending stuff because oh man.
Another trope that I don't like in LGBT books is when they're super sad. Like
the like depressed gay. It's very like I know a lot of depressed gay people, but like not everybody.
Yeah.
And like honestly, everyone's depressed now. Like you can't just like.
No, it's totally
not just
true.
queer people. Like everyone's
in love with their straight best friend thing, like and they're depressed.
Yeah.
I mean, like same, but like everyone's depressed now. Like you're not special. Like
Which should be a book that like that's a main character that thinks they're straight but falls in love with their gay best friend and realizes they're bi.
Oh my gosh, that would be funny. Well, actually, there's the thing on Twitter like forever ago, and I was actually thinking about this for a long time, that someone needs to write a book about a bi character who falls in love with a girl and a boy that look really similar, and it ends up that it's the same gender fluid person. I think that would be super adorable, and I 100% would read that.
That's so cute.
I think my like book I want is some sort of LGBT story with like a Queer Eye vibe of like an LGBT character finding their community and just being like lifted up and celebrated, and it's all nice and wonderful. And I just want more Queer Eye, I think.
And there's no conflict, and everyone's just happy.
I want like more like queer retellings of fairy tales.
Yeah.
I love fairy tales, and like I just think that they're so like, I don't know, there's something so nice about reading a queer fairy tale.
Yes.
There's
Well,
a manga I really want to read, or a graphic novel that's called like The Prince and the Dressmaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cute. It's so cute.
I want to read that.
I was just actually recommended today by another booktuber that Laura Jean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. It's a graphic novel that explores not only a queer relationship, but like an unhealthy relationship. And I think that would be, that's going to be my next one that I really want to get into.
Yeah, I've read a lot of LGBT graphic novels, I think. I recently read Kiss Number 8. Can't think of the author's name right now. It's a graphic novel. And it was really good, but it was also like, I remember like as I was reading it, I like didn't know what direction it was going to go in. Like I was like, is this going to be positive or not? And I actually like when I put it up as like our book of the week at work, like I made sure to put like content warnings for homophobia and transphobia, because there's a lot of it in the first like half of the book that like goes unchallenged for the first half of the book, because the main character doesn't yet like have the like knowledge and vocabulary to challenge it. Like she just kind of is like, oh, this is just what my dad is saying, and then later she's like, this isn't okay. But like it's really, really good, and like deals with like family, because it's basically this girl who she's like kissed 7 people before, and then her like 8th kiss, like everything goes wrong, and like her life is in chaos, and so you're like finding out what led up to that 8th kiss, and it's like her realizing that she's bisexual, but at the same time she's learning about she's like on her dad's side, she has these 2 grandparents, like a grandmother and a grandfather, who've always been her grandparents, and she finds out that like that grandmother is not her real grandmother, and her real grandmother transitioned and was actually a man, and like her like dad and grandfather like totally disowned him, and so like it's like telling this like backstory of her like trans grandfather while she's like figuring out her own identity. So it's really good, but also like it's like the sort of book where I'm like, I would be very cautious to recommend it to, especially to like trans and gay like teenagers who may be in like unstable like environments or like mental health situations. But it's a really good graphic novel.
That sounds interesting. So we've been going for just under an hour. Do you guys have any more questions or statements or bank account numbers or anything you want to share before we sign out?
One thing that I would love to see in just literature in general is older LGBT characters.
Yeah,
I find that especially the majority of LGBT YA is coming out stories, and like not that that's bad or anything, but I would love to see, you know, a character having 2 moms. Oh, just like my uncle coming into town. Oh, it's his new boyfriend, and like, oh, fun family, you know, dinner or something like that, and or just having like a lesbian grandma that just comes in every once in a while, and like that would be so wonderful to have that.
It's like a whole subset of LGBT like YA books we didn't get into, which is like books with queer parents, because there definitely are like quite a few of those.
Lola and the Boy Next Door. That was
that was so good. There's also what is it called? Your Welcome Universe, I think, which is like a deaf main character who has 2 deaf moms. So
I feel like I've read that.
The cover is like a girl, like she's like
yes, I've read that.
I have to read that. I haven't read a book about the character.
I know that's what really piqued my interest. Is
yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah. I think the author isn't deaf, but she's like worked with deaf people a lot, I think, or something. I could be wrong. Cool. And also Becky Albertalli's Upside of Unrequited. She has 2 moms and a gay sister. So.
Cool.
All right. I think we're gonna call it there. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thank you so much for watching this live chat. I had a lot of fun talking about LGBT books. Happy Pride Month to everybody that is celebrating Pride. And join us next Sunday at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time for our normal live chat. Do you know what we're doing next week?
I feel like we maybe have something, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, I feel like we did decide. Oh man,
like
it's a surprise for everybody, including us.
All right. Well, we will see you guys on Tuesday and Thursday in our normal videos, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.